Welcome to Three Count Commentaries. Today we're going to talk about Sami Zayn on Steve Austin's Broken Skull Sessions. And I felt like it was a very enlightening interview. And I felt like we really learned a lot about Sami Zayn from this. And of course, as usual, I like to pick certain things that we can learn out of this. And what I really learned is that Sami Zayn was searching for validation, and that's really something that you have for people who are into independence. Like, we talk on this channel a lot about the indie mindset. And I think if you look at something like AEW and how people react to everything, it is a desire to be accepted, you know? And it's something that Brian Last and Jim Cornette talked about a lot, you know, that the reason why Jim Cornette is such, you know, the number one villain of the AEW sect is because he's a old school 80s, 90s wrestling promoter, talent that doesn't accept current wrestling. He just doesn't like it. And he doesn't like this indie mindset that these guys have. He doesn't like the working style. He doesn't like any of that stuff. The body types, the promo styles, the characters. He doesn't like most of this stuff. He just doesn't like it, you know, and he is vehemently hated. He is vehemently seen as being out of touch. And Sami Zayn is sort of the voice for these guys at this point, where he's looking at things, and he's at this certain points of this interview, he's talking about, you know, not seeing WWE as an option for him because he was never going to be big and muscular and all that kind of stuff. But once he got in, there was these points of validation where he starts to say, maybe I can do this. But he also kept putting a cap on himself, saying, okay, you know, maybe this is as far as I'm ever going to go, yada, yada, yada. It was that search for validation and finally being considered mainstream for all the effort and the work that you put in. And I get it. I dig it. And it made the story a lot more interesting if you watch it, because the most mainstream thing Sami Zayn had done was WrestleMania 38, wrestling Johnny Knoxville. And he was absolutely giddy about this match. I'm talking about Sami Zayn. And what makes this match more interesting is that Steve Austin, who says, I'm more of an old school guy, you know, this is a lot of gaga, but I loved it. And Sami Zayn is just super excited to talk about this match. And he says, like, look, how do you not get that I structured this match like a regular match, but it had a lot of these gags in it? And I hadn't watched the match since it happened, because, you know, I'm kind of weirded out by the whole thing. But it was a fun match. I do remember saying it was fun. You know, it was intensely silly, but it was fun. And Sami Zayn talked about how hard this match was, because you're working with a 51-year-old guy who's not a wrestler, and he doesn't want this to be considered to be an entertainment match or a comedy match. That this was just a wrestling match with some unique weapons and silly gags put it in. And he said he structured it, and it checks every box in terms of an anatomy of a pro wrestling match. So he's talked about, hey, you set up, and I liked how he broke it down, because he actually did go and prove his point. Like, he set up saying, this is a pro wrestling match, and here, let me show you. So then he shows that when you start the match, he runs over to the ring, hits a haluva kick on Johnny Knoxville, and then he says, okay, now you can tell immediately who the fighter is and who's not a fighter is. And then he says, okay, you see Johnny Knoxville hitting him with weapons. That's the only offense that he can get. And he said, that's his shine. You know, this is the only thing he can really do, is to fire up and hit me with weapons. And then, of course, he wanted to showcase the Jackass guys, put himself behind the 8-ball a little bit. So you have to fight out from underneath the hole. So I got it. Like, by the time they had got done showing clips of this match, I got what he was talking about. And you can say, like, in this situation, Sami Zayn was working like a giant. You know, he's bigger, stronger, faster, a better fighter. And Johnny Knoxville is the underneath babyface. And because it's a no disqualification, no count outs, anything goes type of situation, there is no such thing as cheating. So all of these guys who are coming into this match to help Johnny Knoxville, the naked guy who, comes and dances on Sami Zayn and distracts him, Wee Man who comes in and power slams Sami Zayn, all that stuff is legal, and it's just a way of Johnny Knoxville fighting from underneath because he doesn't have the experience, because he's older, and it got more people behind him because it prolonged the match. It prolonged Johnny Knoxville's suffering because, Sami Zayn could have ended it whenever he wanted to. So I think I understood. I think I understood where he was coming from in this respect. And I liked it. I liked that they started with this because this shows that Steve Austin, a guy who doesn't normally like this kind of stuff, but had been there for like the hog pen matches and stuff like that and kind of saw how silly they could be and would never want to be involved in anything like this. And even they talked about it later where Sami Zayn said, hey, look at what I'm doing. Does that really make me a threat to Roman and Brock? Like, look at the kind of matches I'm having. But, and Steve Austin was just kind of nodding because he knew that's how he reacted to other people who wanted to work with him. But they were having silly matches and stuff like that on TV. And we know that, Steve Austin immediately shot down working with Mark Merrill after Mark Merrill got powerbombed by Sable. We know that, Steve Austin shot down working with Jeff Jarrett because Jeff Jarrett got over by working with the women and hitting old ladies with guitars and stuff like that. He wasn't really seen as a threat. So he kind of understood what Sami Zayn was talking about in that direction that he was going in when he was saying, I have to carve out my own piece of the show because I might not get to work with Roman. I might not get to work with Brock. But that doesn't mean that my spot on the show can't be just as entertaining. It can't be just as good. And that maybe one day I can bleed over into that, but I'm perfectly happy carving out my own spot. And I felt that, I like that because it's realistic for starters, but it also shows that if he has a spot on the roster where he can do that he is respected and he is validated and has been shown that he is valued in order to even have a spot in which to do this stuff. But he also, and I think this was very nice too, he talked about it. He said, people whose opinions I respect loved the match between him and Johnny Knoxville. He said Vince loved it. But he says he always wonders if Brett would have liked it. And that just goes to show that there's still a ways for him to go. Where he feels like he won over the entertainment guys, the guys who understand the business in terms of it's an entertainment business, but he also wanted to win over the people who are legitimately interested in technical wrestling and having a good match because Bret Hart was his hero growing up. And this is where we get into the backstory. And he says he became a fan. His dad watched wrestling. His dad was an amateur wrestler in Syria. And when he was 8 or 9 years old, Bret Hart became his hero. And one of his friends had talked him into training with him at a place that only had a mattress. And after they worked out on the mattress a little bit, they ended up taking bumps on the grass, and that he trained for, 5 or 6 months before he had his first match. And then, his first name was Stevie McFly. I honestly didn't know that. And he said that he kept pushing to have one match. He only needed to have one match before he can call himself a pro wrestler. So once he had that one match, he felt like he was a pro wrestler. He had achieved something. But he didn't really see WWE as being a goal that he could attain. Because, of course, he's just starting. He didn't know what he could possibly do. And he said that El Generico, and they kind of tried to do the gimmick where he wasn't really El Generico. And Steve Austin was kind of like, yeah, I've been kayfabed on that one before. And then sort of Sami Zayn kind of buckled very quickly in admitting that he was El Generico. And said it was supposed to have been a one-night thing that of him working under the mask. But it ended up working out for him. He ended up spending years under the mask. And he said something that was very interesting too. And I've heard other people say it, that everybody should work under a hood. That everybody should work under a mask at some point. because you become good at a certain skill set. And then he talked about also later that he had to sell differently once he took his mask off than he did when he had the mask on. Because El Generico, of course, is different. He said El Generico is essentially a cartoon character, so you would sell in a cartoon way, and he can't do facial expressions because his face is covered. So I like that too, because it actually showed that, he has a different skill set, but part of it, the baseline of it, is him working all of those years under a mask. That he had to learn how to sell with his body because he couldn't sell with his face. And then once he took his mask off, he showed that he can also sell with his face. And he also didn't really have to cut a promo as El Generico, but when he took his mask off, he did. He had to learn how to cut promos again. So I like that. So he broke up with his girlfriend in Montreal. That said, hey, I didn't need to stick around Montreal anymore. So he went on the road. He met Kevin Steen, and they said they were like-minded and wanting the same things and having the same work ethic. But Steen, Kevin Owens, saw WWE as a more realistic vision for himself. I think he might have had a little bit more confidence than Sami did at the time. They talked about Ring of Honor, and this was very interesting to me. What he says that it makes no sense that we took over the business, but at the same time, it makes a lot of sense that we took over the business. And what he talked about was all of these guys, Sami Zayn, Kevin Owens, Bryan Danielson, Claudio, all these dudes working against each other. And he says that they created something while working in Ring of Honor where they had greater creativity, more diverse body types, more diverse characters and stuff like that. And it made sense that it made no sense from the perspective that they were not what WWE were looking for in terms of body types and charisma and show business. They weren't interested in them from that perspective. But at the same time, these were the guys who were going out there having really good matches. They had a lot of experience and they were doing different things that, was not taking place in other promotions. So as they started to sort of trickle through, they actually saw themselves rise to the top. And I think they didn't say CM Punk, but I think CM Punk was a really important piece of that because I think he was the first Ring of Honor guy that really broke through. But whatever. He was signed to WWE in 2011, and he said that was the first time he had actually made an active attempt to get into WWE. And then in 2006, Jamie Noble had tried to get him to send a DVD in. And how excited Jamie Noble was that they were supposed to be starting a cruiserweight TV show or a cruiserweight division. And they thought El Generico would be good for the show. And he wanted to show something to WWE, but he had never actually put it together. And it was like, wow, he had no faith in himself. Like Jamie Noble got his foot in the door and he's trying to get Sami in. And Sami's like, not really. I'm okay. I'm good. I'm just going to keep doing this for a little while longer. But Kenyon Seaman had come to a Ring of Honor show. Kenyon Seaman was now, recruiting talent and hiring talent for WWE. And his first big hire was Sami Zayn, El Generico, from Ring of Honor. And I thought that was very interesting because I didn't know that. I thought he was recruited by Triple H, but I think that's what it was Kenyon Seaman was working for Triple H at the time, I think. So I don't know. Musical chairs in terms of those executives. It's hard to tell. But he goes back to WWE in 2010. Well, he goes to WWE in 2010. And this is where he had, one of his many crises of conscience where self-doubt broke in. He says, on the independents, you're on an island. And WWE is the big time. What will the big stars think of me? And this, of course, buttresses the argument we was just talking about a minute ago, where he's worried about what other people think about him, whether he actually fits in. And there was a desire for validation. And he said that he got a couple of little pats on the back. William Regal was one of them, Joey Mercury and Triple H. They all put in a good word for him. They all, had his back at the time. But that wasn't, it wasn't complete yet. Because once he went to developmental, he said everything kind of changed. It was very stifling. And he says that he's from the golden age of NXT. I like that he termed it the golden age, because this would be the pre-takeover era, where it was very stifling. And he says, quote, people were enacting a vision that they shouldn't have, and talked about how he butted heads with Terry Taylor a lot. But even though over the years him and Terry Taylor have grown closer, but he had a big problem with Terry Taylor in the beginning. This is another thing Seth Rollins talked about, having issues with Terry Taylor as well. He said that it was too structured. There was not enough room for creativity. And then they sent Claudio Cesaro down to NXT. And he says that he gives Claudio credit for allowing them to push the envelope. And their 2 out of 3 Falls match is the match that made NXT. At least he believes so. That this is the single match that changed NXT from stifling developmental to something that was more creative, and created the golden age of NXT. And we created it. We built it. He's taking a lot of credit for this. And I think that's very interesting. I had never really considered that. But it's true. That's what I think when I first started to hear about NXT was the time when Cesaro went down there. I still wasn't watching it yet, but that was when I first started hearing about it, is they were having badass matches down in NXT. And I was like, okay, but so what? I keep hearing about great matches everywhere, and I'm tired of hearing about great matches. Like, so what? They weren't doing anything else, right? All right. So while he was in NXT, Dusty was his promo coach and said that he had a natural ability, and that he said Dusty told him that he looks like a young Robin Williams, the comedian. And he says that he believed it until he went back and watched young Robin Williams and said, like, oh, no, that guy's really good. Like, I'm okay. That guy's really good. I don't need to be compared to him. So you see that he would get these compliments, but he would also keep it realistic. He didn't let it go to his head, which I think is very important. And to double back to, the earlier part where we talked about the guys seeking validation, they do let these critiques and the opinions of other people go to their head. The Kenny Omegas and the Young Bucks and the Will Ospreys, they're very arrogant. They, like when Will Ospreay said that, WWE superstars aren't real wrestlers or some nonsense like that. It's like, this guy does, trampoline routines in the middle of the ring, and he's talking about other people aren't really wrestlers. What the hell is he talking about? But it just goes to show that those are the indie guys who go off into, AEW or New Japan or whatever, fully believing in themselves, and they never face any resistance. Nobody ever tells them that they're not good, and what ends up happening is the guys who are constantly told that they're not good and they force their way through it, like Sami Zayn or Kevin Owens or whatever, or CM Punk, they break through. They find different facets of themselves to work on. CM Punk changed his body type. His promos got infinitely better. He got a chip on his shoulder, because he was always told no. He was always told, stop doing this, stop doing that. He faced all that resistance and he broke through it. Same thing with Bryan Danielson. Now it's probably going to be the same thing with Claudio in AEW. When you're dealing with years of resistance, of not being able to break through, constantly being hamstrung, and there isn't people constantly kissing your ass and blowing smoke up your ass, you actually do get better at things, and Sami Zayn talked about how they got better at things. Essentially, they were facing a lot of resistance in NXT. He ended up breaking through that by having this match with Cesaro. He didn't really believe in himself in terms of his promos, but it was Dusty, and then Undertaker, believe it or not, who actually gave him, some confidence in saying, hey, look, you guys are selling tickets out here. He talked about this promo with Neville before their match at Our Evolution, was the one Undertaker saw and gave him a pat on the back and said it was really good and these guys were out here selling tickets. And I was like, what? Now, that is when I started watching NXT. I started watching NXT at the TakeOver Our Evolution because it was morbid curiosity. Like, they're having their own pay-per-views now. Oh, wait, I'll just watch their own pay-per-views, which is what I did. For, I think, the first two. I watched the first two and without watching any of the episodes in between. And then I started watching it weekly. And then that's also when I learned that most people were just watching takeovers and not watching the weekly show. That became far more clear in 2019 when NXT was on television. Yeah, so many people did not watch NXT week to week. Anyway, He talked about the validation of Pat Patterson really enjoying his match with Neville at our Evolution. And he said that he felt like he had finally succeeded at his goal when he became the NXT champion, that it was a confidence booster and it was very validating to see that, he had won a championship in WWE where he didn't think that was ever going to be possible. They talked a little bit about his debut on NXT, talked a little bit about his feud with Kevin Owens. For a time, I'm not going to go into those. He talked about his match with Shinsuke Nakamura, which was interesting. I'm going to spend some time on this by saying that they were trying to move away from what had become a monotonous NXT style of the consistent dramatic near falls. And he said he took some of the blame for saying we started doing that. And, we wanted to do something different with the match with him and Shinsuke. So there were not a lot of big near falls in this match. And I tell you, this is what burned me out on NXT. Epic match. Every match has to be the most epic match of all time. We're going to hit 100 big finishers and people are going to kick out of them. I got so tired of that. And by 2020, that's all they were doing in NXT. It seemed like every match was 40 minutes. Everybody's hitting their finisher 2 or 3 times. Everybody's kicking out of everything. It was ridiculous. That really burned me out on NXT. So I'm glad that he took some credit for it and actually tried to do something different when he wrestled Shinsuke Nakamura in Dallas. But that was a really badass match. They talked about his switch and becoming a little bit more promo driven. And he said he went and had a conversation with Vince about why guys like, Kevin Owens and Seth Rollins, who he considered were his peers, were getting opportunities that he wasn't getting. Why wasn't he moving up the card like they were moving up the card? And he said Vince told him that he hadn't turned heel yet. And he welcomed the opportunity to turn heel because it gave him an opportunity to become more creative, gave him a chance to spread his wings a little bit. And he says that what changed him was he was put into being a special guest referee. And he said it wasn't a match, it wasn't a promo. It was when I was asked to be a special guest referee. And the amount of effort that he had put into it, and that he felt like the company trusted him after that. And he was able to do a little bit more. This will be 2017. He started being a heel, started being a little bit more character driven. He talked a lot about the conspiracy theorist storyline. And he said there was a real documentary filmed, but an quote internal shakeup in WWE, which seems like it's constant with the internal shakeups, prevented it from actually being released. But he hopes that this Broken Skull Sessions actually puts pressure on WWE to get it released. And this conspiracy theorist character, he continues to gain trust. And now he's being put with Logan Paul. And I remember so many people acting up about the Logan Paul being interjected into Kevin Owens Sami Zayn feud. It was like, oh my God, Logan Paul, why is he involved with this? I'm like, he's just a guy, And Sami Zayn made it make perfect sense. He's saying like he needed to create a reason why Logan Paul makes sense in this storyline. And then he said he came up with this idea that I'm a conspiracy theorist. Nobody listens to me. I want more people to see my documentary. I want more people to understand what I'm going through. What better way than to utilize a social media icon like Logan Paul, who has an incredible reach? If I can get him on my side, if I can get him to believe in me, then other people will listen to him and therefore listen to me. So it became almost like this supervillain story where he's going to utilize Logan Paul to promote his own propaganda. And thinking about it from that perspective, it does work, because it's using him as an influencer, which is what Logan Paul gets paid to do anyway. That's what he's famous for. He's a famous influencer. So it's like Sami Zayn wants to use an influencer to promote this idea that there's a conspiracy within WWE against him. And Kevin Owens is his friend trying to tell him that he's being delusional. And that worked, and it worked perfectly fine. I actually like that. And in retrospect, I actually like it a lot more. From a story perspective, it makes a lot more sense, So I liked it. I also forgot Logan Paul was even involved with this. This was WrestleMania 2020. This when they stopped using the numbers. So it was 37, WrestleMania 37. Because 36 was the first 2-night event, and Sami Zayn he wrestled Daniel Bryan at that time. Okay. So this was WrestleMania 37. So this was fun, I enjoyed that. I really wish the movie had come out too. That would have been fun, to have a conspiracy theorist movie come out. The bloodline thing, he said working with Paul Heyman, was very fun. Paul Heyman, of course, believed in him. And he said he loves talking to Paul Heyman about just about anything, that he's a dinosaur walking the earth, because this was a guy who worked for Vince Sr. And I was like, yeah, that's true. Now he has to work with Stephanie. How about that? A wonderful dovetail to this episode was the new direction of Sami Zayn's character, that he feels he doesn't get his respect, So now he's saying that it's an asset of his character that is leading him to join the bloodline. That's why he wants to be a member of the bloodline, because that's how he can get respect. He can get respect by being a member of the bloodline. And he felt like it was closer to how he was when he first came into WWE. That he was constantly looking for ways to be validated and to get respect. And now that's the search that Sami Zayn is on as a character on television right now. He's been a stooge for the bloodline because he feels that being close to Roman Reigns will get him that respect that he feels that he deserves as the locker room leader of SmackDown. And he's still delusional, as the conspiracy theorist character was. And this is what I mean by character work. Like, you can see him stacking things on top of the character. Once the character was created, the great liberator, when he turned heel, you can start seeing that now things are stacked. You just take that character in different directions, So now we're at this point where Sami Zayn wants individual respect that he feels like he lost when he lost the Intercontinental Championship and was embarrassed and all this sort of stuff. He wants that validation back. And that's kind of where they ended, because, of course, Sami Zayn's career is not over, so we don't know if he's actually going to get that respect or not. Hopefully he will. But they talked about his goals. And he said being an Intercontinental Champion, of course, was his goal. A lot of these work rate guys, that's kind of their goal, is to be an Intercontinental Champion. And he says that he wants to manage after his career is over, and that he has an ego, but he also has a balance, and that he wants his legacy to be the body of work, because he wants to be considered an all-time great. And then wanting to be an all-time great, he recognizes that the respect people are going to give to him is going to be different, because you have to take each match in context, which, you should do. It's in storyline. And you have to look at each match on an individual level, because he's probably never going to be, Brock or Roman. But that doesn't mean he can't have his own unique spot and then someday work with those guys. And I thought that was very interesting too. So for me, Sami Zayn is sort of Bryan Danielson was the ultimate in the independent guy seeking validation and just couldn't wait to break through, because he was undersized, didn't have the physique, and also didn't have the promo ability, even though Bryan Danielson got better, and he's actually a very good promo too. Danielson went through the tribulations of, being called a B-plus player and you'll never be a top guy. And they applied so much pressure onto him that it made him the poster boy for what Sami Zayn is trying to do. It made him the blueprint. While CM Punk was a guy who broke through into the mainstream through, having a chip on his shoulder and being the embittered, not really, WWE is not really my thing. He set the standard for like a Kevin Owens for CM Punk. The WWE didn't really want us. They're trying to hold us down. While Bryan Danielson and Sami Zayn are the perpetual underdog. WWE will give us a chance, but they'll never let us get too far. They'll keep putting their boot on our neck. We have to keep fighting back from underneath. Even though Danielson was the eternal babyface, and eventually until he became, of course, a heel. While Sami Zayn is working seemingly mostly as a heel now, but there's a babyface run in there for Sami that is going to be tremendous when it actually happens, and I can't wait for it. And I think that's actually when we're going to start seeing Sami Zayn take that next step. because he's been a heel for like 4 or 5 years now. And he's been doing some really good stuff. And the crowd still really likes him. They still really enjoy his work. But the thing is, now it's going to be time to take this character and actually start to give him respect. And you can't do it the same way that they were doing it before, which means he's going to have to become the world champion. That's the only way to finally do what needs to be done to make this character whole. The only way to do it, because he's been Intercontinental Champion multiple times already. So being Intercontinental Champion is not really going to validate the character. The only way to do it is to become the world champion. Now, I don't know if it'll actually happen, but I wouldn't put it against him. You know, I think that he could be a Bryan Danielson babyface type of world champion for WWE, a Rey Mysterio type of babyface where he doesn't have the physique, even though he is a better promo. You know, he can get people behind him. He can get people to believe in him. I believe that he can actually do it. You know, it's just all about, and now that Vince McMahon's not there, you know, there's still going to be some people right there to kind of block it because they're still going to want the mega stars, the Brock and the Romans. But there's eventually going to be an open space if he hangs in there long enough and manages to stay healthy. I do believe that there will be a space at some point where Sami Zayn is going to be the perfect babyface and the crowd is going to be behind him and it's going to be the right heel in the right space and Sami might be able to get the title. I truly believe that. And that's if they keep him on the trajectory that he's on now. And that's if they even commit to the character and commit to the storyline. Now, I don't think he's going to beat Roman Reigns. So don't clickbait me and say, oh, Mongo thinks that he's going to beat Roman Reigns. No, I don't think he's going to beat Brock Lesnar. The title's going to leave those guys eventually, though. Like, eventually the title's going to get out of that orbit. You know, he may have to beat Theory for it. He might have to beat Braun Breaker for it or something. But, you know, I do believe it'll actually happen if he hangs in there long enough. And if they commit to the storyline that they've created. And, you know, commit to increasing his visibility and increasing his momentum and believing in what he can do. I think he'll eventually get there. But let me know what you guys think. Like, share, and subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later, man. Peace out.